my last video, we saw just how silly anarcho-capitalists are, and I touched on what really separates those guys from being anarchists. Property rights. Property is not a right. But instead of arguing that point, I'd like to take a look at just how costly it is to defend and perpetuate this myth. Now consider the three big rights we're all taught about in school: life, liberty, and property. Now, if you're much of a thinker even then, property always stuck out like a sore thumb. Property? But there it was, and we were told that the smartest dead white guys ever said it was true, so yeah, just go along with it. If you rock the boat, we'll drug you into a stupor. So shut up and buy whatever we're selling, kid. Now, consider all crimes committed in this country, well over 90% are property crimes. Now that's pretty spectacular when you think of it. Why would humans have such a propensity to trespass this perfectly natural right? And when you think of it, a great deal of crimes against liberty and life are usually wrapped around getting property. A guy kills his wife for the insurance money, a kid gets kidnapped for ransom. You could think of a million different scenarios. My point is simply that the vast majority of crimes committed are against the right of property. So how costly do you think it is to protect the supposed right? How do we even begin to come to some conclusion? For instance, I could argue that something seemingly benign like Social Security is really a program designed to quell revolutionary sentiments in the country by throwing some scraps from the table and so indirectly protecting property rights. But that would require more effort than I want to expend. Rather, I'm going to make this simple. First, if we accept that well over 90% of all crimes are property crimes, then it should follow that the bulk of funds spent on what we euphemistically call justice are essentially funds to protect property and the idea of private property. There's one other statistical category we're going to look at, and that is military spending. Now, it shouldn't take too sophisticated an understanding of our current system to understand that our global empire is about maintaining our position of privilege and our access and use of land, labor, and resources of the world, or as the ruling class in this country like to refer to it, their stuff. So let's get started. Take a look at this graph. This breaks down spending by criminal justice function. Police, judicial, and corrections. Comes to about $200 billion, yes, billion with a B, per year. You also notice that in the last 20 years, the amount of money we spend on this has just skyrocketed. Then nobody said it would be cheap to incarcerate more people than any country on the planet. Money well spent, right? Don't be so quick to judge. The military. The big daddy of property protection. Here the numbers are so enormous, so mind-boggling, that I'm going to take a slightly different approach. Here we are on a planet with over 6 billion humans in nearly 200 nations, and the grand total of all those people and all those nations on military spending is just over $1 trillion. Take a look at this graph on worldwide military expenditures. Now, we only make up a little less than 5% of the total Earth's population here in this country, and yet we account for nearly half of all spending. The pie graph you're looking at illustrates this point quite well. A few points to ponder from the globalissues.org while you're looking at this. The U.S. military budget was almost 20 times as large as the combined spending of 6 rogue states, Cuba, Iran, Libya, North Korea, Sudan, and Syria, who spent a measly $14 billion combined. Our military spending is more than the cumulative total of the next 14 nations below us. And if you consider the U.S. and its closest allies, which NATO, Australia, Canada, Israel, Japan, and South Korea, our totals combined for nearly 2/3 of all military spending, or 3/4, depending on who you count as an ally. Are you getting this? We spend a ridiculous amount of money on our military. But I'm not done. Consider the following information. The U.S. Department of Defense has the single largest budget of any government agency in the discretionary budget. Fiscal year 2007 spending for DoD, Department of Defense, and the War on Terror would be $673 billion, or 64% of the net discretionary budget. Fiscal year 2008, don't worry, we'll spend more. We're looking to spend 65% of net discretionary spending, or nearly $700 billion. Just so you get this, we're spending over half of our discretionary budget on death and destruction, and ultimately our mythical right to property. But it gets worse. According to the wonderful little book, Addicted to War, since 1948 the U.S. has spent more than $15 trillion on the military. Here's the illustration from the book, Addicted to War, and as you can see from the illustration, that figure, $15 trillion, is more than the cumulative monetary value of all human-made wealth in this country. To quote directly from Addicted to War, in other words, the government has spent more on the military over the last 4 decades than the value of all the factories, machinery, roads, bridges, water and sewage systems, airports, railroads, power plants, office buildings, shopping centers, schools, hospitals, hotels, houses, etc. in this country put together. That's amazing. This has real and devastating consequences, like incarcerating more of our fellow citizens than any other nation, or the millions of people around the globe we've murdered, or had murdered, or the immense devastation to our environment, and on and on. I could do a whole video just on this, but consider something rather mundane, like our nation's infrastructure. You know, our schools, hospitals, roads, water, and sewage, power plants, all that stuff that keeps our society functioning at some respectable level. The American Society of Civil Engineers' latest report card in 2005 gave our nation's infrastructure a D grade. They assessed that we would have to invest about $1.6 trillion to get our nation's infrastructure back up to speed. I'll provide a link here, but just look at one aspect, maybe one of the most important ones, if you like to be alive: drinking water. According to the ASCE, America faces a shortfall of $11 billion annually to replace aging facilities and comply with safe drinking water regulations. Federal funding for drinking water in 2005 remained level at $850 million, less than 10% of the total national requirement. The Bush administration has proposed the same level of funding for fiscal year 2006. Now, before you go on with your liberal complaint about how stupid this is, understand that our interests, the interests of working people, the interests of the poor, the middle class, are not the interests of the Bush family or the Clinton family or the Gates family or whatever ruling class family you're thinking about. The DuPonts will have access to clean drinking water, and if the roads are too bad, they'll have their trusty jets and helicopters. Our problems are not their problems. This entire system was put into place, according to James Madison, at the Constitutional Convention to protect the minority of the opulent from the majority. And they will go to any length to protect their right to property. They will spend any amount of money, they will kill any amount of people, and they will do whatever they have to do in order to maintain their position of privilege.
Gathered in their masses, just like witches at black masses, evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction, in the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning, death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh Lord, yeah.